614 Special Operations soldiers died in 18 years of war. But that's not the shocking part. The shocking part is that Special Operations Command represents only 3% of the entire U.S. military. Yet they suffered over 50% of all combat casualties in recent years. I'm a former Green Beret, and today I'm going to show you exactly how dangerous Special Operations really are. Not the Hollywood version, not the recruitment video version. The real numbers, the real risks, the real cost. Because what the government doesn't advertise, and what movies never show you, is this. Being a special operator is one of the most dangerous jobs on Earth. And I have the statistics to prove it. Let's start before anyone ever sees an enemy. Let's start with training. Special Operations training is designed to break you. Parachute jumps from high altitude, combat diving in freezing water, live fire exercises where one wrong move means death. The U.S. Government Accountability Office tracked Special Operations training accidents over 10 years. The result? 2,880 training accidents. That's 288 accidents every single year. Nearly one special operator injured in training every single day. 40% of these accidents happen during parachuting and diving operations. The rest come from vehicle rollovers, mountaineering falls, live fire mishaps, and explosives training gone wrong. Now here's some context. Special Operations Command has about 67,500 members total, so 288 injuries per year equals a 0.42% annual training injury rate, less than half of 1%. Honestly, looking back at some of the dangerous things we did during training, that number seems incredibly low. But here's what that statistic doesn't tell you. It doesn't tell you about career-ending injuries, shattered spines, traumatic brain injuries that don't show symptoms for years, permanent disabilities from parachute malfunctions or diving accidents. One accident might be a broken bone that heals in 6 weeks. Another might be a Navy SEAL who drowns during pool training and never comes home. 288 accidents per year is still 288 too many. But training accidents are nothing compared to what happens in actual combat. Getting accurate casualty numbers for special operations is extremely difficult. Most of this data is classified to protect ongoing operations and intelligence sources. But after months of research through Department of Defense reports and academic studies, here's what I found. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq killed 7,053 American service members total. Breaking that down, 2,324 in Afghanistan, 4,599 in Iraq, 130 in Syria and Africa. Out of those 7,053 total military deaths, U.S. Special Operations Command suffered 614 fatalities in the first 18 years after 9/11. 614 operators killed. Median age, 29 years old. That means Special Operations Forces, which represent only 3% of the military, took 8.7% of all combat deaths, nearly 3 times their share. But the danger isn't equal across all Special Operations units. Here's how those 614 deaths break down. 67.6% came from Army Special Operations Forces. Within Army SOF, nearly half, 49.2%, were Green Berets from Special Forces Command. 16% were from Naval Special Warfare, SEALs and SWCC. 9.3% from Air Force Special Operations. 7.2% from Marine Special Operations. So the most dangerous job in Special Operations? Green Berets. They took nearly half of all SOCOM combat deaths. But there's a twist. A naval postgraduate school study looked specifically at Navy SEALs who served in Iraq and Afghanistan between 2007 and 2012. During those 5 years, SEAL operators had a fatality rate 9 times higher than the overall U.S. military. 9 times higher. And yet, SEALs still only accounted for 16% of total special operations deaths, which tells you just how incredibly deadly Green Beret missions were during that period. Of the 614 SOCOM fatalities, 60%, that's 369 operators, were killed in action by enemy forces. The way they died varied by unit. Green Berets, 57.6% died from blast injuries. IEDs, RPGs, explosives. Navy SEALs, 60% died from blunt force trauma, mostly helicopter crashes and vehicle accidents. Air Force Special Operations, 55.6% died from gunshot wounds. Marine Special Operations, split evenly, 50% blast injuries, 50% gunshot wounds. Looking at all 369 combat deaths combined, 45% died from blast injuries, 39.8% died from gunshot wounds. More than half of all SOCOM deaths, 52.3%, happened during mounted operations. Of those, 53% in ground vehicles, 37% in helicopters, 9% in fixed-wing aircraft. One more statistic. In 2018, only 13 American service members died in Afghanistan. 9 of those 13 were special operators. 69% of all deaths that year came from units that represent only 3% of the force. Death isn't the only risk. Special operators face an extremely high probability of being wounded in action. And wounded in action data is even harder to find than death statistics. When an operator dies, there's a funeral, a name on a memorial, public record. When an operator gets shot, maybe he recovers and goes back to the fight 3 weeks later. That doesn't always make it into official reports. But here's what we know. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan produced approximately 53,000 wounded in action across the entire military. The most common injuries? Lower extremity wounds, 19.8%. Open wounds, 18.8%. Chest and abdominal injuries, 17.7%. Traumatic brain injury, 15.4%. Burns, 7.4%. A congressional report found that the wounded-to-killed ratio was about 10 to 1. 10 wounded for every 1 killed. For special operations, the ratio is different. An analysis of the 75th Ranger Regiment found that over 20 years, Rangers sustained 813 injuries and 62 deaths. That's 13 wounded for every 1 killed in action. If you apply that 13 to 1 ratio to the 614 SOCOM fatalities, you get an estimated 7,982 Special Operations Forces wounded in action. Nearly 8,000 operators wounded. If that estimate is accurate, Special Operations would account for roughly 15% of all wounded in action. Remember, 3% of the force, but 15% of the wounded. The official statement from the Department of Defense in 2021 said, although U.S. Special Operations Command makes up just 3% of the joint force, it has suffered over half of all combat casualties over the past few years. Over half. Special operations is extraordinarily dangerous. There's one risk that might be worse than death: capture. Special operators work in small teams, often behind enemy lines, frequently in countries where U.S. forces aren't officially present. If they're captured, They become high-value targets. The intelligence they possess, the operations they know about, the networks they've infiltrated. Enemy forces will do anything to extract that information. I checked the Defense POW/MIA Accounting Agency database. There's no tab for Afghanistan or Iraq. That suggests we don't have official POWs or MIAs from the past 25 years. But that's not because operators weren't captured. It's because captured operators were executed by the Taliban and ISIS before they could be officially classified as prisoners of war. When I was deployed to South America, local drug cartels put a $10,000 bounty on any Green Beret, dead or alive. $10,000. In a region where monthly income averages a few $100s, that's life-changing money. Terrorist organizations in the Middle East would pay far more. The risk is real. Small teams, non-permissive environments, operating behind enemy lines. The probability of capture is significantly higher for special operators than conventional forces. That's exactly why every special operations candidate must complete SEER school: survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. They prepare you for the worst-case scenario: torture, interrogation, isolation, psychological manipulation. Because in special operations, the worst case is always possible. So let's answer the question: how dangerous are special operations? The numbers speak for themselves. 3% of the military, 50% of combat casualties, 288 training accidents every year, 614 operators killed in 18 years, nearly 8,000 wounded. Navy SEALs with a fatality rate 9 times higher than regular military. Green Berets taking nearly half of all special operations deaths. In 2018, special operators represented 69% of all military deaths in Afghanistan, despite being only 3% of the force. The math is brutal. The reality is worse. But despite these dangers, men and women continue to volunteer for special operations. They know the risks. They see the statistics. They understand exactly how dangerous it is. And they volunteer anyway. Because some threats require warriors willing to go where others can't. Some missions are too important to leave undone. Some enemies will only be stopped by operators willing to face extraordinary danger. The sacrifices special operators make are often unseen, unacknowledged, classified for decades. But their commitment to protecting this country and our allies never wavers. Would I go back and do it again? Absolutely, because the danger is the price, and freedom is worth it. If you're considering a career in special operations, understand what you're signing up for. The training will break your body. The missions will test your limits. The risks are real. But so is the brotherhood. So is the purpose. So is the impact you'll have on the world. Life is a special operation. Are you ready for it?